Hey boys and girls, welcome back. Today I'd like to share a discussion about donor cars. So now as much as ever, the Honda K-Series is really popular for engine swaps as well as just modifications in general. So when you're planning an engine swap project, there's a couple different avenues that you can take, whether it's buying parts a la carte, bits and pieces here and there. And the other consideration is just buying a complete donor car where you can basically just get more of those parts in one place. Part of the reason why you would do that is to save money, but there's also some other benefits as well. So let's get right into it. So the first thing I think that's important to consider is the general notion of what is it that you're doing? What is the nature of your swap? And that's going to help inform you of what donor car is appropriate. Now, generally, if you're watching this video, you're probably already aware that the RSX Type S is kind of the gold standard for donor cars for K-swaps, right? You have the K20A2 engine, you have the whatever, I can't remember the code of the 6-speed transmission, which is generally suitable for naturally aspirated configurations. You got an ECU, shifter cables, shifter module, did I say harness, throttle body, axles, subframe, which is useful in like an EM2 swap, or I guess you call it a 6th gen Civic swap. But anyways, so the RSX Type S has been pretty much the standard for K-swap donors, right? And sensibly so. There are other considerations, whether it's the Acura TSX, the Honda Accord, CR-V, Element. Generally, I think you can use those cars as donor cars, but you kind of need to have a good reason to. For an Accord, the transmission is often desirable, especially if you're running a turbo, having those longer, taller gears. But manual transmissions are kind of hard to find in those. And when you do find them, they often have like tons and tons of miles on them, and you can't always trust that transmission is going to be any good. If you're just looking for the motor out of an Accord, and they're not bad motors, especially if you configure it with an RBB or a 3-lobe head. They can be good motors, but it doesn't really make sense. Like I said, unless there's a good reason to, it doesn't really make sense to buy a whole car if you just want the motor. But you can save a lot of money that way if you're just buying all of those pieces, all together in a car. And then discarding the rest. Now, speaking of discarding the rest, part of your value equation and part of your what are you doing in your project is the discarding of the unwanted parts and how much value is in them. So it's certainly worth considering. Generally, things like airbags. Well, airbags are kind of tricky because there are some restrictions on being able to sell them. You can't really sell them on eBay unless you have a certain sort of certification. But things like steering wheels and vents and airbags and seats and wheels and brakes and whichever things that you're not going to use, right? You can turn around and sell them and recoup some of your costs, or perhaps all of it, that you spent on your donor car. One of those items, like an airbox, depending on whether or not you're going to use the factory OEM airbox, that might be one of those things that you can sell and make couple hundred, depending on what the donor is, make a couple $100 back, unless your donor car doesn't have the OEM airbox. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. The RSXs tend to sell for, I don't know, $3,000 plus when you include all the taxes and tags and all the, well, not tags, but all the sort of fees that go along with making a transaction. But you got to consider how much you're going to get back out of that, even if you're using axles, ECU, engine, transmission. You can still sell things like seats and interior bits and pieces and suspension, and you might be able to recoup $1,000 or maybe even more out of a $3,000 RSX Type S. So the second part is, and I was kind of getting into that, is like where do you find these? Where do you source a donor car from? And I'm exclusively looking at salvage auctions. So that's like Copart, State Farm, Progressive, Geico. And I use a broker. I use an online broker called Ride Safely or ridesafely.com. I'm sure there's others. That's the one that I know about, and I tend to prefer their search function because you can enter searches in like a radius around your area where you live or where you want to source a vehicle, and they'll return search results whenever they hit, or daily, or whatever frequency you set it at, and that's kind of convenient. And then they just take like a fucking shitload of your money whenever they bid on your behalf. But these are all dealer only auctions, so you wouldn't otherwise, unless you have a dealer license, you don't have access to these. Copart is an exception. You can pay a membership fee and participate in their auctions, but you still have to pay a shitload of other fees if you end up buying a vehicle through Copart. But definitely salvage auctions is the way to go. And it also sort of depends on where you live, right? Living in southern Arizona, it's a relatively big metropolitan area, but I also have access to the Southern California market, which is multiples bigger, right? So there's these cars are getting old. They're not as easy to find as they used to be, but depending where you are, you can judge by scarcity how much it's worth it to you, and whether or not you want to jump on something and pay $500 or $1,000 to ship it to you, or wait for one to come your way. It's kind of a discretionary thing. Depends on where you're located. And the third item are the sort of specific parameters to look for with individual donor cars, right? So what I mean is, like, when you're looking at a car in an auction lot, whether it's online or in person, right? What do you know? What do you look for? How do you know if that's going to be a good vehicle, right? So the first and most obvious one is like, what's the damage? Why is it there? Why is it in a salvage auction, right? If it's right, pretty much as a donor car, what we really want is one that was hit in the rear, right? You want all the sensitive engine components to be isolated from the incident, the crash, right? Provided that it's there because of a crash, and it isn't always, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But right, where's the damage? And if it's in the front, I've bought cars that were hit pretty bad in the front. This is one of them. Yeah, this one, it's got some issues, but so it wasn't like a super awesome value, but it turned out to be okay. But like, obviously that's really relevant. If you got a car that's hit bad in the front, that's a consideration. You might be taking on more risk. If you're looking at one that's been damaged sort of lightly and it's perhaps repairable, right? That's a consideration. Other people may be looking at that car considering to fix it and sell it, whereas you're not interested in doing that. You just want the parts. So you don't want to pay extra for a fully functional or a car that has potential to be running and driving back on the road if you're not going to use it for that, right? These cars are so old, they're only worth, a few $1,000s, maybe $5,000 in good running condition. So it doesn't take a whole lot of damage, to write that, for the insurance company to write that car off. The other part of the sort of specific parameters are like, going back to the airbox, how well was the car maintained? Was it maintained meticulously and it just got into a nasty fender bender and that's why it wound up in the salvage lot? One indicator that I like to use is the factory airbox, especially on an Acura RSX. Those Acura RSXs are notoriously molested, and the first thing they do is they remove the factory airbox and they put in a hot air intake. Why do I call it a hot air intake? Because it's fucking dumb and it reaches around. It's basically an assembly. I don't have an RSX in front of me, but the intake tube goes and it puts the, usually a pod filter, a cone filter, right at the back near the exhaust where there's just fucking hot, stagnant air. Whereas the factory exhaust whereas the factory intake sits more or less in this position, and it's taking in inlet air from around behind the headlight where we can presume it's at least a little bit cooler. And so it's it's not only, although somewhat, it's not only the dipshittery as far as the modifications that have been done to the engine, but it's the sort of ill-informed intent that's driving it. Not only is that hot air intake not helpful, or those stupid cheap-ass coilovers that crush the car to the ground. Not only are those things not good for the car, but they indicate that the owner doesn't know dick about how to look after the car either. And so we have stupid shit like, this bullshit hose clamp it's not the right clamp, and there's holes that are, somebody wasn't taking care when they replaced the clutch. So those are stripped out, and this guy decided that heater hoses are hard, so he's just going to loop it, and we're not going to deal with that anymore, right? And so somebody that just doesn't, they're just not looking after their things properly, and then now that thing that's not been looked after properly is your thing. There are things you can do to help mitigate that stuff. One is, well, don't buy that car, or don't pay too much for it, right? You can always fuck around with cars that are in worse condition. Just be mindful of your value equation, right? Don't fucking dick up your value equation. Just don't pay too much for it. This one that was out of the donor car dumpster fire. It was not advertised as running and driving, right? I did manage to get it to run, but I took a risk, right? But one thing sort of off of that is one general benefit to a donor car is you can run that motor and potentially the transmission or various, verify function of various other systems in the car, right? It's a huge bonus, so that you can buy a car that's wrecked but running, or in my case, buy a car that wasn't running and finagle it in such a way that it will run, and you can check stuff. You can check stuff like, is it rattling? Is there a noise in the cylinder head? Is there, are there issues with that engine, which is really nice to find out before you've done a bunch of work to swap it into another chassis. I mean, yeah, that would be a real pain in the ass if you realized a risk. You bought a car that you thought was going to be good, you get it home or into your shop and find out that it's not good. That's not great, but it's better than taking a step further and swapping that motor into a car and then finding out that it's no good. So there's a lot of salvage dealers that'll offer you an engine with a warranty. They'll even give you your money back if the engine is bad, and that's nice. But I'd rather, I don't want to wind. I mean, I suppose it's a nice concession that when you find out that you wasted all this time and effort getting this engine that's no good into your car, you can at least get your money back. That's better. But what's even better than that is to know that it's bad in the first place. No, you don't want to waste your money on a bad engine, but you don't want to waste your time either. So that's a huge, huge benefit. And it's one of the main drivers of why I source a donor car. Rather than just go buying, an engine off of somebody's garage floors. You don't know if that's any good, and you don't have any real easy means of determining whether it's any good or not. As far as what you can tell from the webpage on one of these auction sites, the auctions are pretty, they're pretty good about being honest or disclosing at least what they know about the auction lot, right? It's not their lot in life to fuck you over, but they're also not really motivated to find all the issues for you, right? The more they sell the car for, the more money they make. But they are fairly honest, as far as I've seen. They are fairly honest about disclosing what's going on with the car, what they know about it. And one of those things, and that's sort of the second. I'm losing track. Maybe my numbering convention isn't very consistent. So like the sort of second part of this third point, the third point of looking for specific parameters on individual donor cars. The second most important thing is they'll usually take a picture of the instrument cluster, and they'll usually do it when the engine is running, so that not only can you see that the tachometer is at 1,000 or 800 RPM or whatever it typically is for these cars, or any car for that matter, but you can also see the status of the oil light, and that's really important, right? So there have been a handful of times where I've seen actually an RSX, a Type S, where they advertise it as running and driving. So whether it looks like some dipshit has been fucking around with the intake, or just doing generally fucking yob shit. And I think, as anybody who's watching this video probably knows, it's probably safe to assume that if that oil light's on, you got no oil pressure, and if you got no oil pressure, the inside of the engine is wrecked. So that's all I got for you today on this topic. What's your experience been on K-Series donor cars? What do you guys do for like all-wheel drive donors? Is it worth it to buy an Element or a CRV, provided you can actually find one? Is it worth it to buy one, or does it make more sense to source parts individually? Yeah, interested to hear it. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.